Oh, we made it. Well, I wouldn't want to be there now.
Short. It's dark in here.
Okay, go for it. Let's go.
The final subcategory, number 7, deals with marriage, divorce, dating, and so forth. I will here introduce to you so-called affectional evidence that complements main categories numbers 2, subcategory number 1, which deals with GST, genetic similarity theory. You could almost say that they are somewhat related to each other, as genetic similarity theory takes an evolutionary perspective and attempts to explain why it is that like attracts like. And it is in this part, in the subcategory number 7, where I will give you examples of this phenomenon within dating, marriage, and divorce. Again, is it an idea? Is it built into human nature? Perhaps GST in the next segment can give us an explanation of why this is occurring. But until then, you will at least here be given examples of the effect of our built-in racism, or the effect of our inherited racist ideas. Dating studies shows the majority of whites excluding other races but the majority preferring their own. Women of all races prefer men of their own race, and in order to show that the natural inclination is racism, it is merely needed for me to show that there's a slight statistical inclination within a population or ethnic group to intermarry within the ethnic and or racial group.
97% of the replies from these white women go to white men.
Which invites an economic test. How much more money would a man have to make before he'd become popular to women of another race? Here are the results. White women prefer white men, but respond equally to profiles from Hispanic men if they make $77,000 a year more, to black men only if they make $154,000 a year more, and to an Asian man, $250,000 more.
240? What? Really?
You tend to need just an extra security deposit when you go for someone else.
I don't date out of my race.
I want to go with my whole top, so if you guys want to really do, I just don't want to go to like a club all black night. I just don't.
I'm very narrow-minded. I'll be the first to admit that.
And most people do have the same beliefs that I do. It's a bad thing to be labeled a racist these days, and it's such a bad thing that people rather shut up than express what they feel. I'm just trying to say that I don't want people that's not like me around me.
Another way to prove it is to show that interracial and monoracial relationships aren't equivalent. Adolescents' interracial relationships are not equivalent to adolescents of the same race relationship, as interracial relationships are more fleeting and unserious. What's also interesting is that blue-eyed men in particular find specifically blue-eyed women more attractive. Interracial stats. Again, in order to show that the natural inclination is racism, it is merely needed of me to show that there's a slight statistical inclination within a population or ethnic group to intermarry within the ethnic and or racial group. Only 7.7% of American slaves were mulattoes. Interracial couples represented 2% of the population in the 1990s. 92 to 95% of blacks and whites marry within their own race. And if people married in proportion to each group's percentage, we would have 5 times more interracial marriage between whites and Hispanics, and 20 and 50 times between whites and blacks. Now, only 8% of marriages are race-mixed marriages. Steve Saylor noticed a statistical problem in favor of the thesis. Here's interracial marriage statistics in the UK. I'd like to contrast this with homosexuality to make a point. Almost as many, if not more, individuals have engaged in homosexual activity. Thus, homosexuality seems to be more prevalent than interracial dating. By this reasoning, monoracial relationships are almost as much of an inborn disposition as is heterosexuality, if not more so, according to some studies. Another way to test this thesis is to see what happens when the minorities' own populations are increasing. Did they previously engage in interracialism due to a limited opportunity to find partners of the same race? If interracialism does not decrease, then there's no exhibited preference for one's own race on display. If interracialism does decrease, when their own population increases, then the previous amount of race mixing can be explained by them having a limited opportunity to find spouses of the same race. And the theory that people prefer and gravitate towards their own race seems very plausible. This is in fact exactly what we are seeing. If interracial marriages are equivalent to monoracial marriages, then there ought to be no too little difference in the successfulness of the relationships. There's less reported happiness in interracial relationships. This suggests they are not equivalent. It could be that we are completely indifferent to what race the spouse is, but that is not how we are constituted, and thus the results. There's more evidence to support this claim, such as the fact that there's more reported violence in interracial relationships than in monoracial relationships, which again suggests they are not equivalent. Likewise, even successful, long-lasting interracial marriages are more likely to end up in divorce than are monoracial marriages. Again, they're not equivalent. It could be that we're completely indifferent to what race the spouse is, but that's not how we are constituted, and thus the results.
This
you disagree with that?
book.
No, I disagree with that. Yeah. Because there's more than one outcome that's compatible with evolutionary theory doesn't mean that any outcome is. And I could give you any number that would just falsify the theory outright. If there was a society in which people were completely unconcerned about genealogy, if after a woman gave birth, several women gave birth, you could just randomly switch the babies around and mothers wouldn't care that they were raising theirs as opposed to someone else, I would say that refutes the theory.
Well, half of all mothers being stepmothers is getting some way along that road.
However, there's another prediction there, that step relationships should not be equivalent to biological relationships psychologically, and indeed they're not. Daly and Wilson, testing a hypothesis that no one else had thought to look at, again on the basis of evolutionary theory, compared rates of child abuse for natural parents versus biological parents versus step parents, and found enormous differences.
100 to 1, wasn't it?
100 to 1.
Step mothers were 100 to 1 more likely to kill, actually, children.
In the most extreme case. And indeed, the whole psychology of reconstituted families is one of how to cope with the antagonisms between stepchildren and step-parents. That's what the self-help industry on step-parenting is about. That's what the psychologists have to deal with when they see these people. So indeed, it's a prediction that could have gone the other way. It could be that people were completely indifferent to whether a child is theirs or not. That's not the way we're constituted.
There would be a feeling.
Likewise, the result of interracial relationships biracial children are not equivalent to monoracial children and are reported as less happy and more suicidal, and this due to their multiracial parents and not due to alleged outside pressures from society, but from their multiracial parents.
I'm going to present some science, but I'm also hoping to entertain a little bit as well as enlighten. I'm going to talk about two things. One is the importance of genetic similarity in human relationships, and the most recent research on that is that the research that I'm going to be talking about has all appeared in absolutely the very best scientific journals that there are within the psychology and behavior genetic field. And my point in saying this is to validate the importance of the research and show that this is now becoming absolutely mainstream. Okay, I want to start off by going through some similarity slides. If anybody goes to People magazine or Us magazine or looks at celebrities, they're marrying and getting divorced and remarrying, you'll notice very precise and very interesting levels of similarity. In fact, it's almost uncanny. You'll find exceptions to the rule, but anybody can do this research. And if we can go to the next slide, the next one, next one, next one. I mean, just look at it, if you can see that the shape of the nose is really quite uncanny, similar. The next one. And why should people even want to pick similarity in spouses or try to? And the answer is in the next slide. That is, your children look much more similar to you. In fact, they are much more genetically similar to you. Because on average, of course, the man gives 50% of his genes to the child, the female gives 50%. If you're sharing genes in common with your spouse, then your child not only gets your 50% from you, but also gets a percentage that you share with your spouse. And so they can be 70 or 80% similar to you.
Biracial children are not equivalent to stepchildren. However, but much more so than are monoracial children, likewise are adopted children of another race more equivalent to stepchildren than are adopted children of the same race as their adoptive parents. A biracial family is not equivalent to a monoracial family, nor is a biracial adoptive family equivalent to a monoracial adoptive family, suggesting that both race and genes plays a part in this, as genes plays a part in the Cinderella effect. Babies are not considered equal. Parents want a baby of their own race and are willing to pay a lot more for it and wait a lot longer. An adopted baby of another race is not equivalent to an adopted baby of the same race.
Around half of children up for adoption in America are black, yet their chances of finding a family are remarkably slim compared to white children. Part of the blame is being put on white couples who would rather spend thousands of dollars to find a Caucasian child than accept a black orphan into their home.
An adopted baby of another race is not equivalent to an adopted baby of the same race and are more likely to be mistreated, commit suicide, etc. Most adoptees look up and reunite with their biological family. The tie to a family of strangers is very important simply based on genetics and genetic similarity. This occurred so often that Swedish television made a show of helping adopted people to find their biological parents no matter where in the world they were. Foreign adopted children identify with other nationalities. Adopted Aboriginals are so psychologically incompatible that the Canadian state wants the adoptees to familiarize the child with its native tribe.
So let's go to the next slide. This is the empirical data. If you scour all the scientific journals, you go through all the behavior genetics and psychology journals, and you actually count up over the last 60 or 70 years all the studies that have been done on who people marry or who are their best friends, you find that similarity overwhelmingly trumps opposites. Opposites might very well attract sometimes, but averaging it all out, it's similarity. And it's this, 0.84, which is a very high correlation, for similarity of background, socioeconomic status, age, educational level, and race, and so on. 0.52, which is a pretty high correlation for social attitudes and opinions. It'd be very hard to live with somebody or be friends with somebody who had diametrically opposite views to yourself on, say, ethnic nationalism. IQ scores, 0.37 is the average correlation, still very high.
Scientific proof that people choose spouses based on genetic similarity and that it is genetic, as well as that people, when having an interracial relationship, make up for the phenotypical dissimilarity by being more similar to each other in personality traits than are monoracial couples, suggesting that people value phenotypical similarity as they gladly compromise similarity in personality, etc. We are less likely to engage in an interracial relationship the older we get, suggesting manifestations of genetic predisposition for racial preference. People who explicitly accept interracialism for others due to PC implicitly disapproves.